I brought World Cup final tickets to my wife's office to surprise her for our anniversary, but the whole company was celebrating her engagement to the CEO. My wife kissed him, then the CEO placed a diamond ring on her finger as the crowd cheered. I turned around and walked away. I instantly canceled the trip, froze all joint accounts, and withdrew my 85% share from the company, worth $578 million. 30 minutes later, my phone showed 152 missed calls. Then my doorbell rang. I did not open the door right away. I stood in the hallway of our house in Westport, Connecticut, with my jacket still on, my keys still in my hand, and the anniversary card sitting on the kitchen island behind me, unopened, the envelope slightly bent from riding in my breast pocket all afternoon. Inside that card were 2 tickets to the World Cup final, the match being played that month at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, 40 minutes from where we'd honeymooned in a rented cottage outside Charleston 14 years earlier. I'd bought them the week before, from a broker I trusted, paid more than I wanted to admit, and told no one, not even my brother, because Emma always said the best surprises were the quiet ones. I'd booked a hotel in the city for 2 nights. I had pictured her face when she opened that envelope. By noon, I had watched that same face while she kissed another man. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. Then came Emma's voice, muffled through the heavy front door. "James, please open the door." I looked down at my phone. Another call was coming in from her, lighting up the screen with the photo I had never changed. Emma, laughing on the deck of our first house, before the highlights in her hair cost $400 a visit, before the corner office, before ambition hardened into entitlement. I let it ring. "James, I know you're in there," she said, her voice cracking. "Please, just talk to me. Talk." It was strange how small that word sounded after what I had just witnessed. At 11:42 that morning, I had walked into the lobby of Harlow Reed Technologies with a card in my jacket pocket and the tickets tucked inside it. The building was all glass and sunlight, polished concrete floors, living green walls, and a reception desk that looked more like a boutique hotel than a corporate headquarters. I had not visited often in the past few years, partly because I preferred my privacy, and partly because Emma had slowly trained everyone to think of the company as her world, not ours. Still, I expected someone to recognize me. Maybe not the new receptionist, a young man with a headset and a practiced smile, but surely someone from operations, someone from finance, someone who had been there long enough to remember when the company was 12 people in a rented office above a dental clinic in Stamford. Instead, the receptionist barely glanced up. "Are you here for the celebration?" he asked brightly. I smiled, thinking Emma had arranged some kind of team lunch, maybe tied loosely to the World Cup. She was good at those things, the visible gestures, the catered spread, the staged generosity. "I suppose I am," I said. He pointed toward the atrium. "They're just getting started." I heard the applause before I saw the crowd. There must have been 200 employees gathered under the skylight, clustered around a small platform strung with string lights and a banner that read, in gold script, "Congratulations." Someone had brought in a guitarist. Someone else was recording on a phone. The company's logo glowed on a screen behind the stage, and beneath it stood Marcus Levine, the CEO Emma had hired 18 months earlier. I had met him twice, both times at company holiday parties. Sharp-jawed, easy laugh, the kind of confidence that made people confuse charisma with character. Emma stood beside him. She was laughing at something, her hand pressed to her collarbone, radiant in a way I hadn't seen aimed at me in longer than I wanted to count. Then Marcus dropped to one knee. The room erupted. For 1 second, my mind refused to translate what my eyes were seeing. I thought perhaps it was a company joke, some ridiculous morale stunt tied to the tournament. But then Emma covered her mouth with both hands, tears filling her eyes, and Marcus opened a velvet box. The diamond caught the light, the same cut Emma had once told me she thought was old-fashioned. People cheered as Emma nodded. Marcus slid the ring onto her finger. Then he stood, cupped her face, and kissed her. Not a nervous kiss, not a mistake, not something confused or accidental. A person does not kiss someone else's spouse like that unless they've already rehearsed the betrayal in their head 1,000 times. I felt the card slip lower in my hand. A woman near me whispered, "Can you believe it? They're perfect together." Perfect. That was the word that finally made Emma turn. Her eyes found mine across the atrium, and for half a second, all the noise in the room seemed to fold into itself. Her smile vanished. Her face drained. She knew I had seen everything, and still she did not come to me. She did not say my name. She did not step off that platform. Marcus followed her gaze and looked at me with polite confusion, the kind a host gives a guest he cannot place. "I'm sorry," he mouthed, almost kindly. "Do we know each other?" That was when I understood. Emma had not just cheated, she had erased me. I turned around before my dignity could bleed out in front of strangers. No one stopped me as I walked back through the lobby. The receptionist smiled again, still clueless, still cheerful, and said, "Have a great one." I made it to the parking garage before my hands started shaking. I sat in my car with the anniversary card on the passenger seat, and I listened to the faint echo of applause still trapped in my ears. I could have screamed. I could have stormed back in. I could have thrown that card at her face, in front of the whole company, and given everyone the spectacle they were already halfway enjoying. But rage, when it becomes clean enough, gets quiet. I opened my phone. First, I canceled the hotel and released the tickets back to the broker. Then I called the bank and froze every joint account that required mutual review under our marital asset agreement. Then I called our attorney, Martin Keller, who had been my father's lawyer before he became mine. "James," he said, alarmed by my tone. "What happened?" "My wife just got engaged," I said, "to her CEO." There was a silence so complete, I could hear him breathing. Then Martin said, "I'm on my way to the office." "No," I said. "Start with the holding company." Another silence. "Are you sure?" I looked through the windshield at the elevator doors, half expecting Emma to burst through them, breathless and apologetic. She never came. "Yes," I said. "Withdraw the full position." "That will trigger a capital event," Martin said. "I know it will freeze their credit line. I know it may collapse the pending acquisition." "Martin." He stopped talking. "Do it." By the time I drove home, the first call came in, then the second, then 15, then 50. By the time I reached the house, Emma had called 152 times. Now she was standing on our porch, ringing the bell like someone trying to wake the dead. "James," she said again. "Please, I can explain." I walked to the door slowly and looked through the side window. She was still wearing the cream dress from the office, her hair now loose from whatever had held it up, her mascara smudged despite the July heat that should have dried any tears hours ago. Behind her in the driveway, her car sat at an angle, as if she had abandoned it before it fully stopped. For the first time all day, Emma looked like someone who understood that consequences could move faster than excuses. I opened the door only halfway. Her eyes dropped to my face, then to my hands, then past me toward the kitchen, where the card sat like evidence. "James," she whispered, "it wasn't what it looked like." I stared at her, and for one terrible, almost funny moment, I realized that even now, she thought the affair was the problem. She had no idea the empire was already burning behind her. "Then tell me," I said calmly, "what exactly did it look like?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Behind her, her phone began ringing again. Not mine. Hers. She looked down at the screen, and whatever name appeared there made her face collapse. I knew before she said it. The board had found out. Emma looked down at her phone, and the color left her face so quickly it was almost satisfying to watch. Not satisfying in the loud, cruel way people imagine revenge should feel, but in a quieter way. The way a locked door feels satisfying after years of someone walking through it without knocking. She silenced the call without answering. "James," she said, stepping closer. "We need to talk inside." "No." Her eyes flicked toward the street. Our neighbors' houses sat behind tall summer hedges, their porch lights just starting to come on against the fading blue evening. Westport was a town where people pretended not to notice things while noticing everything, and Emma knew that better than anyone. She had spent years cultivating the image of a devoted wife, a visionary executive, someone who remembered everyone's birthday and sent thank you notes people actually kept. Being seen begging on my porch did not fit the brand. "Please," she said, lowering her voice. "I made a mistake." "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," I said. "A mistake is missing a flight. You got engaged to another man in front of 200 employees." Her jaw tightened. It got out of hand. I almost laughed. That was Emma's gift, and maybe also her curse. She could make any disaster sound like weather, a thing that happened, a thing that rolled in unexpectedly, a storm, not a choice. "When did it get out of hand?" I asked. "Before or after the ring?" She swallowed. Behind her, her phone started buzzing again. This time she glanced at it and turned the screen away. But I saw enough. Martin Keller, my lawyer. Emma saw that I had seen. "What did you do?" she whispered. I leaned against the doorframe, and for the first time since walking into that glass atrium, my hand stopped shaking. "I protected what belongs to me." Her expression changed. The panic sharpened into calculation, and I recognized the look because I had seen it across our own kitchen table for years, whenever a conversation began moving in a direction she could no longer control. "James, you can't just pull capital like that," she said. "There are procedures. There are obligations. There are clauses," I corrected, "and you signed them." She stared at me, as if I had spoken in a language she used to understand, but had forgotten through arrogance. 14 years earlier, when Harlow Reed was nothing but a half-developed software platform, a folding table, and a name I had written on a legal pad at 2 in the morning, Emma had not talked about obligations. Back then, she talked about dreams. She talked about building something that made hospital systems safer, that helped doctors track critical patient data faster, that kept small clinics from drowning in outdated software. She had charisma, and I had the architecture. She could sell a room, and I could build the thing she was selling. We were a good team once. That was the part people never understood about betrayal. It did not always begin with a villain and a victim. Sometimes it began with two exhausted people eating takeout on the floor of a rented office, laughing because the Wi-Fi had gone out again. Sometimes the person who destroyed you started as the person who believed in you when no one else did. My father had been the first investor, not because he trusted Emma, but because he trusted me. After he died, his shares moved into a family holding company, and over the years, through additional funding rounds, buybacks, and carefully structured agreements, that holding company came to control 85% of Harlow Reed. Emma knew this, of course. She had known it when she asked me to stay out of the public-facing role because, as she put it, investors are more comfortable when there is a single operational voice. She had known it when she convinced me that my privacy was an advantage, that I could guide strategy from the board level while she handled interviews, conferences, and ribbon cuttings. She had known it every time a business outlet called her the founder, and I corrected no one because I told myself marriage was not a competition. But knowing a fact and respecting it were two very different things. "You're angry," she said, forcing softness into her voice. "I understand that. You have every right to be angry." "No," I said. "I had every right to know my wife was living as an unmarried woman at work." Her face flinched. "Good. Marcus didn't know," she said quickly. That surprised me, though I did not let her see it. "He didn't know what?" She looked toward the driveway, then back at me. "About us. Not really." "Not really," I repeated. "I told him we were separated." The cold moved through me, clean and exact. I thought of Marcus's polite, confused smile, the way he had mouthed, "Do we know each other?" Not cruelly, not smugly, just genuinely unaware that the man holding an anniversary card was the husband of the woman he had just proposed to. "You told him we were separated," I said, "while you slept in my bed every night." Emma closed her eyes. "James, while you hosted my mother for Easter. I know. While we renewed the lake house insurance together last month. I know. While you kissed me goodbye this morning." Her eyes opened then, and for a moment I saw the person from the old days, the one who hated disappointing me. But she disappeared almost instantly beneath fear. "The board is overreacting," she said. "This can be managed." There it was, not repaired, managed. I stepped back from the doorway and picked up the card from the console table. I had brought it in from the car without thinking, and now I held it between two fingers. "These were for the final," I said. "New Jersey. 2 tickets." Her eyes dropped to the card. Something like grief crossed her face, but it came too late to matter. "I wanted to surprise you," I said. "I thought we needed a few days away together. I thought you'd been distant because of the acquisition, because of stress, because of everything you always said was temporary." "It was complicated," she said. "No, building software integrations is complicated. Marriage is difficult. Lying is simple." She looked at me then, wounded by the plainness of it. Another car turned onto our street. Emma instinctively stepped closer to the door, trying to hide from the headlights. I did not move. The lights passed. Her phone buzzed again, then mine. I looked down and saw a message from Martin. "Emergency board meeting scheduled for 7:30 p.m. They are requesting your presence by video. Do not speak to Emma about corporate matters." I turned the phone toward her, just long enough for her to see the first line. Her mouth parted. "James, don't do this tonight." "I didn't do it tonight," I said. "You did." She ran a hand through her hair, and suddenly she looked older than 44, not distinguished, just tired and cornered. "If I'm removed, the company destabilizes," she said. "People lose jobs. Good people. People with mortgages, families." "That is the first honest thing you've said," I replied, "and it should have mattered to you before you turned their workplace into your engagement party." She had no answer. For years, Emma had relied on movement. If a conversation became uncomfortable, she walked into another room. If a question got too precise, she took a call. If I asked about loneliness, she blamed deadlines. But now she was standing on a porch with nowhere to go, and the life she had carefully divided into separate rooms had finally become one house. "Does Marcus know now?" I asked. Her silence answered. I nodded. "Then go explain it to him." "James, please." I began closing the door. She reached out, not touching me, but close enough that I saw the tremor in her hand. "Are you divorcing me?" I paused. The word should have felt dramatic. Instead, it felt administrative, like naming a document that had already been drafted by years of small humiliations I had chosen not to count. "Yes," I said. Her face crumpled, but only for a second. Then fear took over again. "And the company?" I looked at her through the narrowing space between us. "The company," I said, "was never yours." Then I closed the door, locked it, and stood there while she knocked. Once, twice, then stopped. A minute later, her car door slammed. Through the window, I watched her sit behind the wheel without starting the engine, shoulders bent, phone pressed to her ear. I did not know whether she was calling Marcus, the board, or another lawyer. For the first time in 14 years, I did not need to know. At 7:30, I sat at my kitchen table, in a gray t-shirt with a glass of water beside me, and Martin's face glowing on my laptop screen. One by one, the board members joined the call, each looking stunned, careful, and professionally frightened. Then Emma appeared. She was no longer on my porch. She was in her office beneath a framed profile piece, that had called her the woman rebuilding medical data infrastructure. Her camera turned on. She looked directly at me, and every person in that meeting finally understood that the man they had treated like a footnote was the only reason they still had a company to save. The board meeting began without the usual small talk. No one asked about anyone's weekend. No one commented on the tournament schedule. Even the company's general counsel, who had a habit of opening difficult meetings with an awkward joke, simply cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. Emma sat alone in the executive conference room, the skyline of Manhattan glowing behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her makeup was gone. Her hair was pulled back tight. For a woman who had spent years mastering every public appearance, she suddenly looked remarkably ordinary. Martin sat beside me at my kitchen table. "James," he said quietly before anyone else spoke, "answer only what you're asked." I nodded. The chairman of the board adjusted his glasses. "We've received notice," he began carefully, "that Whitmore Family Holdings has withdrawn its equity commitment and suspended all discretionary capital support, effective immediately." No one looked at Emma. Everyone looked at me. "Mr. Whitmore," the chairman continued, "can you confirm the notice is authentic?" "Yes." "And that Whitmore Family Holdings remains the beneficial owner of 85% of Harlow Reed Technologies?" "Yes." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Several directors had known the ownership structure on paper, but ownership documents and reality were different things. For years, Emma had become the face of the company. Employees quoted her. Investors photographed her. Reporters called her the founder. Somewhere along the way, people had begun believing visibility meant ownership. Emma had believed it most of all. She leaned toward her camera. "James, please don't make permanent decisions based on today's emotions." Martin placed a hand lightly over my legal pad, reminding me not to respond emotionally. "I made no decisions today," I answered calmly. "I executed rights that have existed for years." Emma closed her eyes for a second. The chairman turned toward her. "Emma, is there anything you need to disclose before we continue?" A long pause. Finally, Emma spoke. "My personal situation has become complicated." "Complicated?" one director repeated flatly. Another board member, Linda Foster, folded her hands on the table. "Did you represent yourself inside this company as unmarried?" Emma hesitated. "Yes." "Were you in fact married?" "Yes." "Were members of executive leadership aware of your marriage?" "No." The room became painfully quiet. No one cared that Emma had been unfaithful. They cared that a senior executive had concealed material personal facts while conducting a highly public relationship with the company's own CEO. Corporate governance had just become a legal issue. The general counsel spoke next. "Given these disclosures, I recommend placing Ms. Whitmore on immediate administrative leave, pending an independent investigation." Emma looked directly into the camera. "You can't be serious." The chairman sighed. "I wish we weren't." By 8:30 that evening, the news had not reached the media, but inside Harlow Reed, everyone knew. Corporate rumors traveled faster than any press release. Someone noticed Emma leaving the executive floor carrying a cardboard box. Someone else noticed Marcus's office door staying closed. Security quietly deactivated Emma's executive access card. The news spread through private employee group chats within minutes. No one posted anything publicly. Not yet. The next morning, I woke after barely 3 hours of sleep. For the first time in years, Emma wasn't beside me. The silence felt unfamiliar. Not lonely, just unfamiliar. I made coffee, fed our aging golden retriever, Murphy, and stood by the kitchen window, watching kids ride bikes down to the summer camp bus stop. Life outside continued exactly as it always had. That realization grounded me. My world had shattered. Everyone else's had not. At 9:15, Martin arrived carrying 2 thick folders. "The banks have responded," he said. I invited him inside. "They've suspended the acquisition financing," he said. "I expected that." "They're asking whether Whitmore Family Holdings intends to remain invested after restructuring." I looked at the folders without opening them. What did you tell them? The truth. He smiled slightly. I told them the owner still believes in the company. That surprised me. He noticed. You never wanted to destroy Harlow Reed. No. I wanted to stop someone from pretending she owned it. Exactly. People always imagined revenge as burning everything down. Sometimes, revenge meant refusing to let someone keep stealing credit for what you built. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Marcus Levine. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. Hello? His voice sounded nothing like it had at the board meeting. It was quieter, almost fragile. I know I probably have no right to call you. No, I answered honestly. You probably don't. He accepted that. I didn't know. I believe you. He exhaled sharply, as though he'd been holding his breath all morning. She told me you'd been separated for almost 2 years. I know. She said the divorce paperwork was delayed because of business assets. I know. She showed me an apartment lease. That made me pause. What apartment? Silence. Then Marcus answered. She rented an apartment downtown. I stared at the wall. Emma had rented another apartment, not to live in, to support a lie. Every late meeting, every overnight strategy session, every business trip that ended too late to drive home. There had always been somewhere else. Not because she needed another life, because she needed evidence of one. I feel sick, Marcus whispered. You should. I never would have. I know. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry. For the first time since our anniversary, I heard genuine remorse from someone connected to this disaster. I believe you're sorry, I said. But sorry doesn't undo what happened. No, he paused. Will you ever forgive me? I looked out the window again. I don't know you well enough to forgive you. He didn't argue. Instead, he quietly said, That's fair. Late that afternoon, Martin called again. We found something. His tone immediately caught my attention. What? Old authorization records. I drove to his office. He spread dozens of documents across the conference table. Expense approvals, equity transfer forms, investment authorizations. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Then Martin pointed toward several signatures. They're yours. I frowned. No, they're excellent copies. My stomach tightened. I never signed these. I know. He slid another document beside them. Your authentic signature. The difference became obvious. Tiny, almost invisible, but obvious. Emma hadn't simply betrayed our marriage. Someone had been forging my signature on corporate documents for years. Martin folded his hands. We're having forensic analysts review every executive authorization from the last 5 years. How many? Hundreds. I slowly sat back in my chair. Every emotion I'd carried since our anniversary shifted. Until that moment, I believed the story was about infidelity. Now it was becoming something much larger. Corporate misconduct, fraud, possible criminal exposure. Martin looked at me carefully. James, you need to prepare yourself. For what? If the investigation confirms what we suspect, he paused, Emma isn't just going to lose her marriage. I finished the sentence for him. She's going to lose everything. Martin didn't answer. He didn't need to. The evidence spread across the conference table already had. As I stared at the forged signatures bearing my name, I realized something that chilled me far more than the engagement party ever had. Emma hadn't crossed one line. She had been crossing lines for years. Our anniversary hadn't created the disaster. It had merely exposed it. The next 48 hours moved with the cold precision of a machine. Martin brought in a forensic accounting firm from New York, the kind that did not ask unnecessary questions and did not use dramatic language unless a document deserved it. They set up inside a locked conference room at Harlow Reed. Badge access restricted, blinds drawn, laptops open beside banker boxes of old authorizations, board packets, wire approvals, and executive compensation files. I did not go to the office. That was deliberate. If I walked into that building too soon, people would turn the investigation into a personal war between a husband and a wife. I wanted no gossip, no hallway whispers about revenge, no excuse for Emma to claim I was acting from heartbreak rather than evidence. So I stayed home, answered questions through Martin, and let the professionals do what Emma had always underestimated. They followed paper. By the third day, they found the pattern. It was not one forged signature, or even a handful. It was a system. My name had been used to authorize temporary executive loans, approve inflated travel reimbursements, and fast-track vendor contracts tied to people Emma knew personally. None of it was reckless enough to scream fraud at first glance. That was what made it dangerous. It was polished, layered, and wrapped in corporate language clean enough to pass through busy hands. But lies aged badly. Every document had a timestamp. Every approval had metadata. Every transfer left a trail. At 6:12 on a Thursday evening, Martin called me. "James," he said, "we have enough." I was standing in my laundry room, folding one of Emma's blouses, because habit is sometimes the last part of love to die. I looked down at the fabric in my hands and suddenly felt foolish for touching it. "Enough for the board?" I asked. "Enough for the board, enough for civil action, and possibly enough for referral to federal authorities." I closed my eyes. For one brief second, I wished the truth had been smaller. Then I remembered Emma kissing Marcus under the skylight, while 200 people applauded a lie. "Then send it," I said. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the next morning. This time, Emma was not invited as an executive. She was invited as the subject of the investigation. Marcus appeared on the video call from his office, pale but composed. He had recused himself temporarily from all decision-making connected to Emma, and the board had accepted. He did not defend himself. He did not blame me. When the chairman asked whether he had known Emma was married, he answered clearly, "No, she told me she'd been separated for 2 years." "And did she ever disclose that Mr. Whitmore controlled the majority ownership of the company?" Marcus looked down for a moment. "No, she told me her husband had no operational involvement and that the ownership structure was old family paperwork." The phrase landed heavily. Old family paperwork. That was what Emma had reduced my father's investment, my years of labor, and my silence to. Then the forensic accountants began. They did not raise their voices. They did not need to. They showed signatures, metadata, wire approvals, lease agreements, and executive expense records. They showed the apartment Emma had rented downtown and classified as a strategic client hospitality suite. They showed jewelry purchases labeled as investor relations gifts. They showed private travel booked through corporate accounts. Weekends Marcus had believed were business retreats, because Emma had surrounded every lie with just enough paperwork to make it look legitimate. Marcus covered his mouth once. Only once. Emma sat frozen. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded thin. This is being taken out of context. The lead investigator, a woman named Denise Lell, adjusted her glasses. "Ms. Whitmore, metadata does not have context. It has timestamps." No one smiled, but I almost did. Emma tried again. "I had authority to act on behalf of the company." "You had operational authority," Denise said. "You did not have authority to forge Mr. Whitmore's signature." Her eyes moved to me then, and for the first time, there was anger beneath the fear. "You're enjoying this," she said. I felt every face on the call turn toward me. I could have denied it. Instead, I told the truth carefully. "No, Emma, I am not enjoying this. I am surviving it." That silenced her. By noon, the board voted unanimously to terminate Emma for cause, revoke all unvested equity compensation, and refer the findings to outside counsel for civil recovery. Her name would be removed from all active company materials until the matter was resolved. Marcus would remain on administrative leave pending completion of his own ethics review. though preliminary findings showed he had been deceived rather than complicit. It was not dramatic. There was no shouting. No one threw a glass. The revenge came in signatures, votes, and locked accounts. And somehow, that made it feel more complete. That afternoon, Marcus asked to meet me in person. I almost refused. Then I thought of the look on his face when he learned about the apartment, and I realized there was one conversation left that Emma did not get to control. We met at a small coffee shop in Fairfield, far from the office and far from anyone who might recognize us. Marcus arrived first. He wore a plain t-shirt, no watch, and the ring was gone from his pocket, sitting somewhere in a drawer, I assumed. When I sat across from him, he stood. "I'm sorry," he said. "You already said that." "I know, but I need to say it looking at you." I studied his face and found no arrogance there, no victory, no trace of the man on the platform accepting applause. Just humiliation, the clean, brutal kind. "I believed her," he said. "That is not an excuse. It's just the truth." "I know. She made me feel chosen." That sentence hurt more than I expected, because I understood it. Emma had always known how to make a person feel like the room had rearranged itself around them. Marcus looked down at his hands. "When I saw you in the atrium, I thought you were an investor or someone from a charity board. I didn't know I was looking at the man whose life I was standing inside." For a while, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "She lied to both of us, Marcus, but she married me. Her first duty was to me." He nodded, tears filling his eyes. "I know. I could have hated him. Part of me wanted to. Hatred would have been easier than the uncomfortable truth that the other man was not always a monster. Sometimes he was another person, standing in the wreckage, holding a different piece of the same lie. "I won't protect you from consequences," I said. "I'm not asking you to." He paused. "But I won't punish you for what she did alone." His eyes lifted to mine. That was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was justice. 3 nights later, Emma came back to the house. This time, she did not ring, over and over. She knocked once, then waited. Through the window, I saw a woman who looked nothing like the wife I had brought a card to on our anniversary. Her hair was down, unstyled. Her face was pale, tired. The confidence had drained out of her, and without it, she seemed smaller, almost unfamiliar. I opened the door but left the chain in place. She looked at the chain, then at me. "I deserve that," she said. "Yes." She swallowed. "I lost the company." "No," I said. "You lost the illusion that it was yours." Her eyes filled, but I did not soften, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I had spent too many years softening every hard truth until she could step around it. "I'm not here to ask you to stop the investigation," she said. "Good. I'm not here to ask you to take me back." "Good." She nodded slowly, as if each word cost her something. "I came to say I'm sorry." The old James would have reached for the door. The old James would have mistaken regret for repair. But the man standing there now had watched too much burn to confuse smoke with warmth. "Are you sorry because you hurt me?" I asked. "Or because your life fell apart?" Emma looked down. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, very quietly, she answered, "I don't know anymore." And that was the first honest thing she had said since our anniversary. Emma stood on the porch for another moment, waiting for me to say something that would make the future less frightening. I didn't. The silence between us no longer belonged to resentment. It belonged to truth. Finally, she nodded. "I understand." I wasn't sure she did, but for the first time in a very long time, understanding was no longer my responsibility. I closed the door gently, not angrily, and watched through the sidelight as she walked back to her car. She didn't look back. Her shoulders were slumped, her hands buried in her pockets, moving like someone who had spent years climbing toward a summit, only to realize she had been carrying the wrong map. Murphy wandered into the foyer and rested his head against my leg. I scratched behind his ears and whispered, "I think we're going to be okay." For the first time since our anniversary, I believed it. The divorce took months. Real divorces usually do. There were financial disclosures, property evaluations, depositions, and more paperwork than either of us thought possible. Because of the prenuptial agreement and the ownership structure that had existed long before our marriage, the legal process was surprisingly straightforward. Emotionally, however, nothing about it felt simple. Emma never contested my ownership of Harlow Reed. She couldn't. The documents had existed for years, and the investigation had removed any illusion that the company belonged to anyone else. The civil claims related to the forged signatures continued through separate counsel. Those matters were resolved through negotiated settlements, restitution, and permanent restrictions on Emma serving as an officer of any company governed by the agreements involved. It was a painful outcome for her, but it was also the consequence of choices made repeatedly over time, not of a single terrible afternoon. Justice, I learned, rarely arrives all at once. It arrives in carefully numbered pages. Marcus completed his ethics review. The independent investigators found no evidence that he had participated in the forged documents or benefited from the financial misconduct. His greatest mistake had been believing the person he loved. The board reinstated him as CEO 6 weeks later. Before accepting, he called me. "I won't take the position," he said, "if you think I shouldn't." I appreciated the question more than he probably realized. "You earned the job," I replied. "But because of everything." "Because of everything," I interrupted gently. "Don't waste the chance to do it honestly." He was quiet. "I don't expect us to become friends." "I don't either, but I hope one day you'll believe I never wanted your life." I looked out the window at the first hints of turning leaves along the fence line. I already believed that. When we ended the call, I realized forgiveness had arrived without announcing itself. Not complete forgiveness. Not the kind that erased scars. Just enough to stop carrying someone else's guilt. The board asked if I wanted to become CEO. For years, that had been the obvious next step. Years earlier, I might have accepted without hesitation. Instead, I surprised everyone, including myself. "No." The chairman blinked. "You built this company." "Yes." "You own it." "Yes." "Then why?" I smiled. "Because ownership and purpose aren't always the same thing." I accepted the role of executive chair instead, focusing on long-term strategy while leaving daily operations to Marcus. It was the arrangement I should have chosen years earlier, not because I lacked the ability to lead publicly, but because leadership works best when it reflects who you actually are instead of who other people expect you to become. For the first time in years, the company felt honest. 3 months after our anniversary, I found the World Cup final ticket confirmation still sitting in a folder on my desk. The reservation had long since been canceled, the seats released and resold to strangers who would never know what they'd almost meant. The little card I had written for Emma remained folded inside the same envelope. I read it once. Then I smiled sadly and fed it through the shredder, not out of anger, out of acceptance. That evening, I opened my laptop and bought 1 ticket. Same match, same stadium, same section I'd originally chosen. The seats we would have shared. New Jersey greeted me with a warm night, and a stadium so loud it felt like standing inside a heartbeat. I walked in without anyone beside me. I bought a soft pretzel I didn't finish. I stood for the anthem and sat through extra time with strangers who became friends for 90 minutes and then went back to being strangers. On the way out, under the stadium lights, I made one promise only to myself: never confuse being needed with being valued. They are not the same thing. Nearly a year later, Harlow Reed announced a new investment initiative supporting early-stage healthcare technology companies founded by veterans and first-generation entrepreneurs. The idea had been sitting in one of my notebooks for almost a decade. Now we finally built it. At the launch event, Marcus introduced the program. He thanked the board. He thanked our employees. Then, Unexpectedly, he thanked me. Some people build companies, he said. Others build cultures, where the truth eventually matters more than appearances. We are here because James Whitmore refused to sacrifice either. The applause that followed sounded very different from the applause I had heard on our anniversary. That applause celebrated illusion. This one honored integrity. The difference mattered. A few weeks later, I received a handwritten letter. Not an email, not a text, a letter. It was from Emma. She wrote that she had taken an operations position at a small regional software company in Vermont. It wasn't glamorous. No keynote speeches, no press mentions, no corner office. She wrote that every morning she unlocked the office herself, made coffee for the staff, and left every evening knowing exactly what her title meant: employee. She apologized again, not for losing the company, not for losing her reputation, but for spending years believing success entitled her to ignore the promises she had made to the person who loved her most. At the bottom of the page, she wrote one final sentence: "I hope one day I become someone worthy of the forgiveness I asked for." I folded the letter and placed it in a box with old photographs, not because I wanted to relive the past, but because pretending it never happened would teach me nothing. Some chapters deserve to stay closed. They do not deserve to be erased. People sometimes ask whether revenge brought me peace. The honest answer is no. Revenge gave me justice. Peace came later. Peace arrived the day I stopped measuring my future by someone else's betrayal. Emma lost her marriage because she chose deception over honesty. She lost her career because she chose ambition over integrity. She lost the company because she forgot that borrowed power is never the same as earned trust. As for me, I didn't win because she lost. I won because I finally remembered that my worth had never depended on whether someone else recognized it. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's refusing to let their choices destroy the person you were always meant to become. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you had been in James's place? Would you have made the same choices or taken a different path? Share your perspective in the comments. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about betrayal, justice, resilience, and second chances, please consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey.